Today, we are wading into what is really a philosophical battlefield.
It's a movement that was dedicated to pure idealism and then discovered the painful cost of reality. We are analyzing the battle for the soul of Buy Nothing.
It's a remarkable and, a very complex saga. Buy Nothing, or BN as it's often called, began back in 2013.
On Bainbridge Island, Washington?
Right. It was founded by Rebecca Rockefeller and Liesl Clark, and the initial premise was actually quite elegant. They wanted to create these radical, local gift economies.
All built on neighborly trust, this idea of abundance and a complete rejection of will commerce.
Exactly.
And it was always positioned as something more than just a swap meet, or a way to get rid of your old clutter. The sources really emphasize it was an ideological project.
It was a way to build what they called gifts of self and community wealth, but through relationships, not transactions. It was explicitly pushing back against the basic mechanics of capitalism.
And this model just exploded in popularity. I mean, it grew so fast. It went to nearly 5 million participants worldwide across tens of thousands of local groups.
Mostly on Facebook.
Yes, almost entirely on Facebook.
And that phenomenal growth, that's what sets up the central paradox of this whole deep dive. As you can see from the sources, the moment this pure, anarchic, anti-commercial movement reached a massive scale.
It became reliant on the very thing it was trying to reject.
Precisely. It was reliant on Facebook, a corporate platform that is, engineered specifically for data extraction and monetization.
And that reliance, coupled with the internal stress of just trying to maintain this utopian model, it led to a profound internal crisis.
An ethical crisis, and then ultimately an external battle that has just fractured the entire community.
Exactly. Our mission today is to unpack that paradox. I mean, how do you institutionalize a radical anti-establishment idea?
It's a huge question.
We're going to explore the critical internal ethical failures and the policy shifts that forced the Buy Nothing Project, or BNP, to reckon with systemic bias. And then we'll pivot to that external crisis.
The decision to break away from Facebook.
Right, and to build their own app, which then culminated in the organization weaponizing its legal trademark against the very grassroots groups it helped create.
And we have a really comprehensive stack of materials for this. It lets us see the crisis from all sides. We've got original founder statements. We have some pretty damning community reviews from Reddit and the App Store. And even manifestos from the breakaway movements like Gifting with Integrity. So it really gives us a 360-degree view of this ideological conflict.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. I want to start with that foundational moment where the idealism of the founder's vision first crashed into the reality of American geography and social structure.
A very hard crash.
The initial rule set was designed for maximum trust, but the sources show that these well-intended roles, they inadvertently caused significant systemic harm.
They were designed for a very specific, very localized, and you could argue a homogenous community. They just did not scale well to diverse, urban, or historically segmented areas.
Let's start with the big one, the cornerstone rule, the one-group rule.
Often summarized as, give where you live.
The narrative behind this rule was, on the surface, all about community building. The original intent was to prevent what they called transactional tourism.
Right, where people would just drive all over town just for free stuff without any connection.
By requiring members to join only the group where they physically lived, the goal was to forge those deep, hyper-local trust bonds.
Yeah.
Knowing the person picking up your old lamp was literally your neighbor.
That was the pure intent. But the sources detail the devastating negative impact that arose when they tried to map this idealistic principle onto the existing social landscape.
Onto the real world.
Yeah. When the BNP began to map out their group boundaries, they had to use existing civic or municipal geography. We're talking tax district lines, zip codes, pre-existing neighborhood association maps.
Things that were already drawn on a map.
Exactly. And the critical problem here is that those existing community boundaries are not neutral. They are artifacts of historical discrimination.
You mean things like redlining?
Yes, redlining, socioeconomic stratification. These lines were often drawn with bias built right in.
So by simply mirroring the existing map lines, the Buy Nothing movement became a digital overlay for institutionalized segregation.
Precisely. A movement that was designed for radical inclusion ended up structurally reinforcing the very segregation its members often lived under. They were essentially creating new digital walls based on old, biased physical ones.
Wow.
The unintended consequence was that, communities of color or lower income areas, they might have been artificially separated from resource-rich, adjacent neighborhoods.
So it hindered the free flow of mutual aid where it was arguably needed the most.
Exactly.
That is a critical insight. It shows that even a utopian project, when you try to scale it,
Yeah.
it has to first confront these systemic biases that are just ingrained in the infrastructure it uses. Even something as simple as a map.
And this rigidity, this one-group rule, it was weaponized at the local level.
How so?
The sources detail all these instances where local group leaders, well-meaning volunteers just following the letter of the law, use the role to deny access to some of the most vulnerable people, the very people who needed the gift economy the most.
What specific types of exclusion did the sources highlight?
There was significant exclusion of individuals experiencing homelessness or those in transient housing who just couldn't prove a fixed address within the boundary.
That makes sense.
It also affected domestic workers, caregivers, or community organizers who were trying to post on behalf of family members or clients who didn't live within that strict geographical box.
So the rule prioritized this.
Yeah.
This idea of hyper-local purity over basic human need.
It did. The mechanism designed to maximize trust was being used to deny the very people who needed community aid the most.
So how did the Buy Nothing project pivot once they realized the damage this was causing?
To their credit, the founders were transparent about the failure. They initiated a major policy shift and moved away from that strict geographical purity.
That would change the rule.
They did. The focus is now on finding creative ways to break down those segregating boundaries, to build truly inclusive gift economies. They shifted from rigid enforcement to personalized accommodation.
Urging group leaders to find ways to include those non-traditional participants.
Yes, regardless of their housing status or the rigidity of the map lines. It was a recognition that true community interdependence is much messier and, frankly, more ethically complex than neat cartography.
If that was the policy failure, let's look at the language failure. There was a similar conflict over communication styles that showed how easy it is for well-meaning guidelines to become elitist and exclusionary.
Ah, yes, the fight over acronyms.
It sounds so small, but it was a big deal.
This point is often overlooked, but it was highly symbolic. Initially, the founders suggested members actively avoid common abbreviations like ISO for in search of,
Or NIL for next in line, PPU for port pickup.
all of those.
And their rationale was beautiful on paper. They believed that encouraging full sentences, asking for a little narrative, avoiding acronyms, it would foster genuine community connection and storytelling.
Right, to make the groups feel less like classified ads and more like neighborly conversations.
They wanted depth over efficiency.
Yes, but as the movement scaled, that guideline drew really sharp criticism, particularly from the disability advocacy community and people running these huge, diverse urban groups.
The consensus was that the rule was fundamentally ableist and elitist.
It was,
Well, why ableist?
because it excluded huge swaths of potential participants, forcing long narrative posts significantly disadvantaged people who were in a hurry, like parents or shift workers.
Or people with physical difficulty typing.
Or people with developmental disabilities, or the visually impaired using digital screen readers. Acronyms are often crucial accessibility tools for efficient digital communication.
And what about the elitist part?
Well, it also excluded non-native English speakers. Those users often know the standardized buy-sell trade acronyms, even if they struggle with complex conversational English narratives.
So the founders' pursuit of a higher community narrative inadvertently penalized people for their communication needs or just their need for speed. I saw reports that this wasn't just a suggestion either.
Oh.
Some local group leaders were actively removing members for using abbreviations.
The idealism led to a kind of tyrannical enforcement. When group leaders prioritized the aesthetic of a long personal post over the basic need for quick, accessible communication, they drove users out.
So what happened?
The BNP had to walk that guideline back completely. They stated clearly that all communication styles are welcome and necessary for an inclusive group. The emphasis shifted to understanding the intent, regardless of the format.
This theme of good intentions, unintentionally reinforcing systemic bias, it runs deep. It seems to culminate in a major reckoning over their code of conduct.
This is perhaps the most painful ethical failure the founders detailed in the sources. The BNP initially relied on these vague concepts like, keep it civil.
And they had members take a civility pledge.
It did, often using that true, kind, necessary litmus test for difficult topics.
On the surface, that sounds like a benign, even positive guideline for managing online interaction.
It does. But they learn, and this is a difficult but crucial lesson they publicly acknowledged, that words like civility and kindness in online moderation are frequently used to enforce the status quo.
The silence marginalized voices.
Exactly. When Black, Indigenous, and people of color BIPOC members spoke up about instances of racism or microaggressions or bigotry they were seeing in the groups, the rules were applied against them.
So a member reporting a racist incident would be told that their post was not kind or not civil,
Yes.
effectively silencing the complaint itself under the guise of maintaining group harmony.
Exactly. The rules became tools of what the sources termed white fragility, where the discomfort with discussions of injustice was prioritized over addressing the injustice itself.
And didn't the founders initially tell people to take those conversations elsewhere?
They did. They claimed these critical discussions about systemic racism didn't fit the group's mission of sharing free stuff.
That refusal to create space for essential conversations. I mean, that act of structural silence must have done immense damage to the movement's credibility within marginalized communities.
It did. The founders acknowledged causing much damage. They made marginalized groups feel fundamentally unwelcome and disregarded within a movement that was theoretically dedicated to connection.
So what came out of that reckoning?
A massive, uncomfortable internal audit. The founders publicly owned up to their white fragility and internalized racism, recognizing that a movement built on community has to be willing to confront all forms of division, not just economic ones.
What practical steps did they take?
They established a volunteer equity team, specifically tasked with dismantling that problematic governance structure.
And their primary job was what?
The primary output was replacing the entire code of conduct, which was still tainted by the word civility, with a new, robust, and explicitly anti-racist community agreement.
And this wasn't just a linguistic change.
No, it mandated that groups must make space for discussions of equity and systemic problems. It was an essential step for the movement to maintain any shred of moral authority, especially in the post-2020 social landscape.
It's fascinating that a movement dedicated to anti-consumption found that its hardest challenge wasn't material scarcity at all.
No.
It was the deeply ingrained social and ethical biases within its own structure. They realized they couldn't just spread a methodology, they had to constantly refine their governance to ensure it didn't replicate real-world injustices.
And that realization that structural issues required structural solutions is what forced the next, even bigger pivot.
Yeah.
The move away from the completely decentralized, volunteer-led structure towards something formalized, something institutional.
The initial growth of Buy Nothing, it was powered by pure enthusiasm and volunteer hours. It created this behemoth of a system. I think we need to appreciate the sheer administrative scale we're talking about here.
We're talking about an organizational structure that, at its peak, involved between 6,000 and 10,000 global volunteers.
That's a huge number.
It was a deep hierarchy. You had local admins managing the daily groups. They reported up to regional team members who were, in turn, guided by the global team members.
It was a massive, unpaid corporation structure designed to manage an anti-corporate movement.
And the sources clearly indicate that system became completely unsustainable. It just collapsed under its own weight.
So why did this volunteer army ultimately fail the mission?
There were multiple factors that compounded. First, the communication inefficiency across thousands of people in that hierarchy was just paralyzing. Decisions were slow, feedback loops were enormous, and it created administrative sprawl.
And the second reason?
Second, and more critically, that hierarchy gave specific layers of management access to the foundational documents, the internal processes, and that allowed them to amplify the systemic issues we just talked about.
So they were misusing the one group rule or the civility pledge to enforce their own local biases.
Exactly. The complexity of the hierarchy made it harder to police the very flaws they were trying to fix locally, and it amplified the capacity for abuse.
And the sources say the local group leaders felt intensely frustrated by this.
Oh, they felt strangled by bureaucracy. They viewed themselves as being controlled by these distant regional teams, unable to implement common sense local decisions.
So the solution the founders chose was radical, and for many volunteers, traumatic.
They dismantled the hierarchy. They began by removing the middle tier, the regional team members, and later they dissolved the global team entirely.
That is the ultimate anti-establishment move. You fire the managers and you flatten the organization. But I imagine removing thousands of dedicated volunteers, some of whom had worked tirelessly for years. That was deeply unpopular.
Extremely unpopular. The sources cite extensive community backlash from the volunteer corps, who felt, in their words, undermined, undervalued, and dismissed after contributing years of free labor.
So what did the new structure look like?
The BNP transitioned toward a flatter open-source model. They shifted responsibility directly to the local leaders and created a much smaller, non-hierarchical admin hub with volunteer mentors who offered guidance rather than centralized control.
They had to break the organizational structure to save the core methodology.
They did, and if that was the internal governance change, the external structural change was even more dramatic, and it led to the main conflict.
Their decision to completely break away from the corporate platform that made them famous. Facebook.
The move was necessary due to severe mission creep. The founders realized the dissonance was just overwhelming.
Facebook's business model.
Yeah, selling private user data, allowing the marketplace and commercial ads to slowly creep into the buy-nothing feeds. It was corrosive to their core mission.
Plus, Facebook locks up user data. The community wasn't truly theirs. It belonged to Meta. They couldn't govern their own fate.
The moment they realized they could be shut down or undermined at any time by Meta, they were forced to seek true independence.
And that journey to independence required them to adopt the very tools they philosophically opposed.
That's the crux of the financial paradox. To gain legal footing and control, the Buy Nothing Project was formalized as a Public Benefit Corporation, or PBC.
Okay, that's a critical legal detail. Let's explain the PBC structure. Why choose a PBC over, say, a traditional nonprofit or a standard corporation?
Well, a standard nonprofit has fundraising limitations, and a standard C Corp must legally prioritize maximizing profit for shareholders.
Right.
The PDC structure is a hybrid. It is a legal entity where the directors are legally mandated to balance financial returns with a stated public benefit.
Which in BNP's case was providing free global gift economy access.
Correct. This mandate gave the founders a crucial legal defense. They could prioritize the anti-commercial mission over profit, legally shielding themselves from future shareholder lawsuits if they chose mission over maximizing returns.
It sounds like a necessary, pragmatic compromise. Using a corporate shield to protect an anti-corporate mission.
It was. But creating that independent platform, the proprietary Buy Nothing app, which launched in 2021, that required capital, serious capital.
And this is the point that caused intense community backlash.
It did. To fund the app, to pay for server space, professional development, security, and a small paid support team, they had to seek traditional investment.
The sources confirm they appealed to over 100 investors, including venture capitalists.
Yes.
Let's just pause on that image for a moment. The founders of a radical anti-consumerist movement, sitting in meeting rooms, pitching their dream to venture capitalists. The cognitive dissonance is staggering.
And the community reacted exactly as you'd expect. The immediate accusation hurled at the BNP was selling out the anti-capitalist ethos.
They were in a trap.
A total trap. They needed consistent cash flow to support the platform and ensure long-term stability and independence from Meta. But seeking that capital fundamentally compromised the very principles that attracted 5 million members in the first place.
So how did they reconcile this financial paradox after that initial backlash?
They moved toward a hybrid, self-sustaining model. They now rely heavily on charitable donations, direct contributions, and the development of sustaining memberships.
Which are essentially paid in-app subscriptions.
Yes, they're using those to cover their infrastructure costs. They shifted the funding away from traditional VC investment to a model supported by their dedicated users.
But the reliance on in-app purchases and subscriptions features we will discuss in more detail later, that still felt like a fundamental betrayal of the everything is free principle to a lot of people.
Absolutely. And the irony was just cemented when they published their manifesto, the Buy Nothing, Get Everything plan.
They are literally selling a physical book about buying nothing.
Yeah.
You have to appreciate the pure, distilled cognitive dissonance of that commercial choice.
It's a powerful metaphor for their dilemma. The book contains a detailed action plan for a buy-nothing life, and it explicitly states no social media required.
And yet,
to distribute that message and raise essential funds, they had to participate in the consumer economy. They acknowledged the irony. They urged readers to borrow the book from a library or a neighbor, or to purchase it used. But the fact remains, the infrastructure of anti-commerce required commerce.
Every move they made towards survival forced them deeper into the corporate, legal, and financial structures they initially sought to destroy.
And that tension ultimately manifested in a crisis of control over the brand itself.
Once the Buy Nothing project formalizes a PBC and developed a proprietary platform, the natural next step in securing the institution was protecting its intellectual property.
This is where the story shifts from internal philosophical struggle to external aggressive legal conflict.
This secured trademark protection for Buy Nothing and Buy Nothing project between 2022 and 2025.
And their official rationale was clear. They claimed they were acting defensively. They needed to protect the mission's integrity, ensure groups adhered to the non-commercial standards, no selling, no trading, and prevent consumer confusion.
To stop other companies from capitalizing on the goodwill of the brand.
Right. It sounds like a standard business move.
It does. But the way they enforced this trademark was perceived by the community as a hostile act of monopolization, utterly counter to the spirit of mutual aid.
This is the peak of the fracture. In late 2025, the BNP began aggressively enforcing its trademark rights, and this was executed by mass reporting hundreds of independent, volunteer-led gifting groups on Facebook.
Through Meta's automated brand rights protection program.
Exactly.
The sources recount these sudden, brutal shutdowns. These weren't small, inactive groups we're talking about.
Not at all. We're talking about groups with tens of thousands of members, like the one in PDX, with over 11,000 active participants removed overnight, without any warning.
And the timing added a severe layer of ethical fallout.
It did. This mass deactivation happened around periods of acute economic hardship, like when federal SNAP benefits were delayed or during local emergencies.
So these decentralized Facebook groups were often the only functioning local mutual aid networks, distributing food, diapers, critical resources.
And disabling them at that specific moment without notice or any opportunity for admins to even rename their groups. It was widely perceived as prioritizing corporate brand control over immediate social utility and human welfare.
The backlash was instantaneous and furious. Community members who felt they were the movement accused BNP of monopolizing and capitalizing off the very anti-consumption ethos they pioneered.
They felt it was all to drive people onto their paid feature app.
The quote that circulated widely was, "Buy nothing except the right to talk about buying nothing."
That phrase perfectly encapsulated the profound sense of betrayal, and it forced this deep legal and ethical debate over trademark law itself.
Critics quickly pointed out that U.S. trademark law is fundamentally designed to prevent confusion in commerce.
Exactly. Since these grassroots Facebook groups were strictly non-commercial, everything was free, no money, no barter, the argument emerged that enforcing the trademark against them for descriptive use might violate basic normative fair use principles.
So the argument is that buy nothing describes the activity, the act of not buying, rather than the specific service mark of the Buy Nothing project organization itself.
That's the legal hurdle. A generic term like buy nothing, which describes an activity, is considered a descriptive mark. For BNP to gain strong protection and stop others from using it, they had to prove the term had achieved secondary meaning.
Meaning they had to show that consumers primarily associated the term buy nothing with their specific organization, not just the general concept of gifting.
Right. And while the USPTO granted them the trademark, the fact that thousands of independent groups had flourished suggests the fair use argument, that groups were using the name descriptively, had significant legal merit, even if the groups lacked the resources to fight it in court.
And what role did Meta, Facebook's parent company, play in escalating this crisis?
Meta was accused of being complicit, if not intentionally harmful. Their brand rights protection program is largely automated.
So it's just bots.
Pretty much. Admins who experienced the takedowns reported that the platform's bot mechanisms just auto-approved these trademark complaints with little to no human oversight.
So groups were deleted before admins could even appeal or just change the name?
Yes. It destroyed years of community history, millions of posts of crucial mutual aid data. This automated speed just compounded the damage, and it left volunteer leaders feeling utterly disregarded by both the organization they had supported and the platform they had used.
The irony is rich and hard to ignore.
It is.
The organization tried to gain independence from the corporate platform, Facebook, by adopting corporate tools like trademark law, only to use those tools to dismantle the very decentralized community they had built on that platform.
It was a failure of governance that prioritized brand identity over the actual social utility of their network.
A disastrous misalignment of priorities.
And the aggressive legal action created a schism that proved a movement's values. Neighborly reciprocity, mutual aid, were fundamentally stronger than their adherence to the branded intellectual property.
The grassroots community refused to be controlled.
They were forced to rebuild entirely.
Which leads us directly into the fractured future, the reality of the official app, and the diaspora of the expelled communities.
The primary goal of the aggressive trademark enforcement was, to push the entire community onto the proprietary Buy Nothing app controlled by the PBC.
But the problem, as detailed extensively in community reviews, is that the app simply failed to replicate the organic, high-trust, and hyperlocal intimacy of the original Facebook groups.
It just didn't work as well.
Let's dive into the reality of the app. While it provides some centralized features, like streamlined posting and customizable pickup instructions, user feedback is rife with recurring, crippling technical issues.
The app maintains an outwardly decent overall rating. It's around 4.4 out of 5, but the comment sections on Reddit and in the App Store, they tell a story of frustration.
Users constantly cite it as clunky and unreliable.
Right, plagued by frequent logouts, the persistent loading circle of doom, and the failure to notify users about messages or offers. One reviewer said that using it was like banging their head against a digital wall because of the bugs.
Usability issues are frustrating. But the deeper structural problem lies in the erosion of the hyperlocal focus that was the original movement's strength.
That's the critical flaw. The Facebook groups used immediate neighborhood boundaries, ensuring proximity. The Buy Nothing app's default viewing radius, however, is often set at a much wider range, sometimes up to 20 miles.
Which fundamentally undermines the neighborly aspect.
Complete.
If I am in Brooklyn and I get an offer for a free bookshelf, but the pickup is 15 miles away in the Bronx, that's no longer a convenient gift from a neighbor. It becomes an impractical, time-consuming transaction.
The spontaneity and utility of hyperlocal gifting are completely lost.
Exactly. The larger radius turns the hyperlocal gifting model into something closer to Craigslist's free section. It reduces the interaction to mere logistics rather than community bonding.
And perhaps the most egregious violation of the original egalitarian spirit are the so-called pay-to-play features embedded within the app's monetization structure.
Tell us about the sustaining membership. How does paying for premium access undermine the core concept of an anti-capitalist gift economy?
The sustaining membership is their core revenue stream. It costs users up to $54.99 annually, and it grants access to several premium features.
But one in particular caused intense outrage.
The bump to the top feature for posts.
A paid feature designed to give preferential visibility to your free post. That completely contradicts the philosophical foundation that all gifts are equal, all needs are equal, and everyone participates on equal footing.
It creates a tiered system of need and giving. The wealthiest users can essentially pay for convenience and higher visibility, circumventing the organic flow of the gift stream that the founders initially championed.
And there are other paid features too.
Yes. Sustaining members also gain the ability to save multiple locations and customize their community viewing radius, features that the free user has to live without. This move just cemented the community's accusation that the institution was prioritizing revenue over radical egalitarianism.
Beyond the paid features, there's also the issue of trust. The move away from Facebook meant they lost the social graph.
And trust is the currency of the gift economy. In the original Facebook groups, users could check profiles, see mutual friends, verify local identity. That created a high degree of confidence.
Confidence you need for things like porch pickups or home visits.
Right. The proprietary app lacks this social graph. Users reported it was significantly harder to confirm if a user was a real person or a reliable neighbor, potentially increasing the risk of scams or just time-wasting no-shows.
So the mechanism they built for independence simultaneously degraded the trust mechanism required for reciprocity.
It did. And the result of this systemic failure, the aggressive trademark enforcement combined with the buggy, less intimate app, was that the grassroots community demonstrated intense resilience.
The movement proved independent of the branded intellectual property.
The mass takedowns did not kill the methodology. They only forced a massive, rapid reformation. Independent groups demonstrated the true power of mutual aid by immediately rebranding to descriptive, legally safe alternatives.
What were some of the most common replacement names adopted by these diaspora groups?
You saw groups quickly adopt names like Gifting with Integrity, Community Gifting, Gift Everything, Freebox.
And my favorite, the slightly tongue-in-cheek, Buy Not a Thing.
Exactly. This rapid reorganization proved that the fundamental impulse neighborly sharing could not be contained by a trademark.
And one of these alternative communities actually formalized into a direct counter-movement.
That's the Gifting with Integrity, or GWI movement. This network was formalized by former admins who fundamentally disagreed with the BNP's pivot toward monetization, the loosening of the rules, and the use of aggressive legal action.
So GWI explicitly positions itself as the preservationist movement, adhering to the original strict, rigorous idealism that BNP had abandoned.
Exactly. GWI's core tenet is the preservation of the original anarchy and purity. They explicitly reject the BNP due to its focus on money and control.
So they still use the strict geographical boundaries.
They do, and crucially, they enforce the one-group rule that the BNP had walked back due to all those equity concerns. They also strictly forbid any monetary transactions or even tip jars for admins.
They're sacrificing the modern, flexible inclusivity for the rigorous original definition of the gift economy.
It's a remarkable ideological schism. One side, the BNP evolved, compromised, and institutionalized its principles to ensure long-term survival. The other side, GWI, splintered to preserve the pure, uncompromising, but potentially exclusionary idealism.
And we should note that for users who want to avoid Meta entirely, regardless of the brand name, the diaspora also led people back to older, pre-existing platforms.
That's right. Users are returning to networks like FreeCycle and Trash Nothing, which have been operating gift economies for decades. More importantly, some groups are exploring decentralized alternatives like bonfire networks.
Which are what?
They use federated digital spaces designed to coordinate non-financial economic transactions across community-owned, non-corporate platforms.
So the methodology is surviving by shedding the requirement for centralized control.
Yes. The survival and thriving of these independent networks, despite the aggressive legal action, it ultimately validates the power of the gift economy methodology over the proprietary brand. The movement's anti-capitalist ethos successfully survived the central organization's attempt to use capitalist tools to control it.
This has been a fascinating and exhaustive journey into the ethical and structural challenges of scaling radical idealism. We've watched the Buy Nothing movement grow from a local experiment into a global structure.
A structure forced to reckon with systemic injustices, dismantle its own hierarchy.
And finally, clash head-on with the enormous costs of creating and protecting its own infrastructure.
The Buy Nothing conflict serves as a textbook illustration of the inherent difficulty of scaling social movements dedicated to anti-commercial principles.
To gain necessary legal stability, mission consistency, and independence from Facebook, the founders chose to become a public benefit corporation and secure the trademark.
And in doing so, they had to adopt the very tools, formal incorporation, capital, intellectual property law that they initially sought to reject.
And crucially, in that choice, they effectively prioritized the stability and defense of the brand over the immediate decentralized social utility of their expansive network. That prioritization caused the schism.
And the creation of rival groups like Gifting with Integrity. The central tension is unavoidable. Centralization, even when it's motivated by altruism and mission protection, risks breaking the anarchic, anti-establishment spirit that fueled the initial growth.
You can build a robust, legally defensible system. But if that system involves charging $55 a year for premium visibility,
or legally silencing volunteer groups providing essential mutual aid,
you fundamentally undermine the moral authority that gave your brand meaning in the first place.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? Here's the final provocative thought we want to leave you with. The most enduring lesson from the Buy Nothing struggle isn't about giving away free stuff. It's about the mechanisms of trust and control.
When a community's foundational allegiance rests entirely in a shared methodology, a principle like radical neighborly reciprocity, rather than in the branded intellectual property, how much control can an organization truly exert before its attempt to institutionalize the mission becomes the very thing that destroys the community's essential trust?
Think about that tension next time you join a social movement that relies on a centralized, corporate-owned platform.